Hello, this is the lecture video to accompany the readings on Aristotle, and the reading assignment for Aristotle begins on page 272 of our PDF. And as you can see, that page opens up, well, the section rather, opens up with sort of just a reminder of what we talked about with Plato, because it is nice to, contrast the figures of Plato and Aristotle. Plato, of course, we talked about in the context of the epistemological theory of rationalism and the metaphysical theory of idealism. Aristotle is our introduction to the opposite of Plato in a couple of different ways. First of all, his epistemology, whereas Plato is a rationalist, Aristotle is an empiricist. But Aristotle is also the opposite of Plato in his metaphysics, whereas Plato was an idealist. Aristotle is a materialist. So John Chafee, the author of our text, spends a little bit of time sort of reviewing Plato here, just to sort of set the stage for Aristotle, and he talks about he Chafee mentions Plato's theory of the forms and how Aristotle, even though he was Plato's student, he rejected almost all of Plato's teachings. And when asked about that, later in his life, as to why he didn't agree with Aristotle, or came to reject why Aristotle came to reject so many of his beloved teachers thoughts and ideas and arguments. Aristotle responded by saying, I love Plato, but I love truth more." And I've always enjoyed that quotation from Aristotle, because it really communicates this idea that you can love somebody and disagree with them at the same time. Just because you like somebody doesn't mean that you have to agree with them. And certainly we have a lot of disagreements between Aristotle and Plato. And one way of framing the difference between Aristotle and Plato. Remember, Plato has this with his theory of the forms. I think I used the example of a specific tree and treeness, and what Plato is going to say is that we have to have an understanding of the form of treeness. That sort of universal, that universal idea, that universal form of treeness, and then we sort of work our way down to individual trees. And what Plato is going to say is that an individual tree is a tree in virtue of its participation in the form of treeness. So we have to have the understanding of treeness first, and then we can sort of work our way down to an understanding of individual trees. Aristotle reverses that. Aristotle is going to say, no, we don't have the idea or the form of a tree, of treeness first. What happens is we encounter, through our senses, individual trees. I encounter an oak tree, and I encounter a particular elm tree, and I encounter a willow tree, and I encounter a maple tree. So through our senses, we encounter those individuals, and then we reflect upon those sensations, those experiences we had, and we work our way up to this universal idea of what it means to be a tree. So again, Plato starts off with the universal, works his way down to the particulars. Aristotle reverses that, starts off with the particulars and works his way up to the universal. So we have differences in their ideas, their arguments, and even their methodology. Scrolling down here, I'll talk a little bit about this, about Aristotle's two categories, matter and form, a doctrine which is known as hylomorphism. And again, I'm going to be throwing out some vocabulary here. I'm assuming that you're going to be getting it from both the textbook and the other required resources that are embedded in this lesson. But whereas Plato says that we have forms, and the forms exist in this eternal ethereal realm, and then we have physical objects that participate in the form in some capacity. So Plato is separating the forms, which are pure ideas, right? They're non-material, non-physical. Plato separates the forms from the instantiation instances of those forms that exist in the realm of becoming. Remember that divided line we talked about previously with Plato, the divided line that separates the world of becoming and the world of being. The world of becoming, that's the world of sensation. The world of being, that's the world of the forms. Aristotle says no, he disagrees, unsurprisingly. He disagrees with Plato, and he says you can't separate form from matter. Form and matter always occur in tandem, according to Aristotle. If I have if I have a table, and if I remove the form of the table, well then I no longer have a table, right? It's only a table if it has a flat surface and it has legs to support that flat surface. If I disrupt the form of a table, I no longer have a table, right? I might have the individual components of a table, but I certainly don't have a table. There's a difference between a box of parts that could be a table under an optimum set of circumstances and an actual table, right? So that's as part of what Aristotle is getting at with hylomorphism. I have to have both the matter and I have the form. Just because I have wood doesn't mean that I have a table, right? The table that's in front of me here is in fact made of wood, but just because I have wood doesn't mean I have a table. That wood has to be assembled and put together, formed together in a very specific way before I have a table. So that's one way of understanding what Aristotle means by hylomorphism. Another concept, another fundamental concept that is emphasized in the readings is this concept of entelechy, and you'll see the root of that word, T-E-L-E. That means end or goal or purpose. If you've studied, genetics, maybe perhaps you've studied telomeres. Those are the genetic material that's on the end of the gene. And they're called telomeres because it comes from the Greek word telos, that just means end or goal or purpose. And so extrapolating from that, if we're talking about the concept of entelechy, it is simply Aristotle's worldview. It's the notion that everything has an end, a goal, or a purpose. Nothing happens randomly. There's nothing that happens by chance or fiat, at least according to Aristotle. Quantum mechanics notwithstanding. Aristotle would have hated quantum mechanics. Aristotle's conception of the universe is that it was teleological. That everything in the universe had a specific goal, a purpose, an end that it was attempting to achieve. And there's this image of an acorn at the bottom of that page, and Aristotle, well, we can use that to give an account of Aristotle's conception of entelechy. What Aristotle is going to say is that an acorn has a purpose, it has a telos, it has a goal, it has an aim. And we don't know notice that I used the word know there, so I'm talking about this epistemological issue. We don't know what the function of an acorn is by rubbing our chins and contemplating the form of acornness, right? That's stupid. We come to know the function of an acorn from what we observe. And what we observe is that out of all the things I can plant in the ground, there's only one thing I can plant in the ground and have an oak tree as a result of that. And that's an acorn, right? If I plant a tulip, I get tulips. If I plant onion, I get onions. If I plant an acorn, I'll get an oak tree. Now, certainly not every acorn becomes an oak tree, right? Some acorns fall in swimming pools and become nothing. Some of them fall in the road and get run over by a car and become nothing. Some acorns, get eaten by squirrels and become squirrel feces. So it might be tempting to say, it's like, well, how do we know that the purpose of an acorn isn't to get run over by a car? How do we know that the purpose of an acorn isn't to fall into a swimming pool? We've observed those things happening, But what Aristotle would say is, well, there's all kinds of things that can fall into a swimming pool. There's all kinds of things that can, can fall in the road and get run over by a car. There's all kinds of things that can get eaten by a squirrel. But again, there's only one thing that can become an oak tree. And again, how do we know that? Not because we rubbed our chins and contemplated the form of acornness. We know it on the base of what we have observed. So whereas someone like Plato, a rationalist like Plato, is going to say, observations, sensations, perceptions, they don't constitute the basis of knowledge. Aristotle's an empiricist. He's going to say, no, actually, the basis of knowledge is what we observe. That's what informs us about the world. So, talked about the notion of entelechy, the example of the acorn. The four causes. There are a lot of additional resources in this unit about the four causes, and so I'm not going to talk in great detail about them. I'll just mention them really quickly, and I'll use my beloved pineapple whip cup as an example. So the four causes: the material cause, the formal cause, the efficient cause, the final cause. The material cause of this cup. The material cause of this cup is stainless steel, right? I can't have this cup without stainless steel. I could have a different cup, without stainless steel. But this cup, if I remove the stainless steel, I no longer have a cup, right? So the stainless steel, that is the material cause of this cup. If I don't have the steel, I don't have the cup. The formal cause of this cup is how that steel is bent and arranged. I could take this same steel and I could make a bookmark out of it. I could take this same steel and I could make a kitchen knife out of it. I could take this same steel and I could make some screws or some nuts out of it. But again, I only have a cup if the steel, which is the material cause, is put together in a very particular form. So the formal cause of the cup in this case is simply, again, the embedded form, right? It's shaped, it is formed like a cup. And the efficient cause of this cup would be whatever person working in the factory was making the cup, right? Somebody who pulled the lever, pressed the button, or in olden days would have been a smith, with his hammer and anvil, shaping the cup. So that's the efficient cause, that which brings it about. And then finally, the final cause. The final cause of the cup is basically, why do we want cups in the first place? The reason why we want a cup. And the reason we want a cup is so that we can hold liquids in a manner that makes it easily acceptable. It makes it easily possible for us to imbibe those liquids. So those are that's a quick rundown of each of Aristotle's four causes. And I think that runs us to the end of the reading assignment that applies to Aristotle. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this video to a close. I will ask you to enjoy the rest of the day, and I'll see you in the next video.